the view of my screen? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Does
sir.
everyone have the view
Yes,
of
sir.
my
Yes,
screen?
sir.
Good one. Right. Hello. To start with, always consider that a burn injury is a form of a trauma. This is the first and the most important thing to start the day with. And remember that thing throughout your life, that burns are a form of a specialty trauma or a special form of a trauma which has its own dimensions. That also means that whenever you have a burn victim or a burn patient, there are two injuries to treat. One is the burn injury, and one could be the other effect of a physical injury. Say, for example, particularly patients who get trapped in a closed room with falling things, they have had injuries. Like one of our patients had a spleen injury while he was trapped in a room that was firing, and by the time the spleen injury was detected, though it was too late. Now, so please understand that all the principles of trauma that you do apply to these patients of burn injuries. Now, whenever we talk about burns, let us start very straightforward on what are the responsibilities or what are the management of burn injuries, or burn management is, rather than talk about etiologies, classifications, let us talk about management of burns. And when I talk about management of burns, I mean to talk about flame burns, or I mean to talk about thermal burns. If you have other burn injuries, because as a surgeon, rather than talking about an emergency physician, you are required to get an opinion or have an opinion on burn patients. So let us talk about that. Now, the first of all is something that we usually neglect, is something called the first aid. And when you talk about a first aid in a burn, please remember that the first aid in a burn is remove the patient or remove the victim, which is a better word, from the source. Now, that also means that the gentleman or the lady who is removing the victim from the source should not become a second victim. So, this begins with an important word, that in mass casualties like the one we had in our city around a couple of years, there was a big fire and around a couple of firemen were also badly injured. So please remember that the victims should be removed from the source is number one. Number two, please remember that the second one is to cover or to remove the clothing which are usually soaked in or in fluids or water or etc., and to cover the patient immediately with a blanket and a clean clothing. Now, please remember that wounds before they come to the hospital should be covered by something. Rather than keep it open, it should be covered. Now, majority of people are going to apply cold water, which should not be applied. I think you know this, so there is no use talking. But what is important is it should be tap water, or if it is a clean source of a water, the water should be remembered at a room temperature, which is more or less of a temperature of about 25 to about 30 degrees centigrade. Is usually the temperature which could be used copiously to wash that area. The next one of this is the patient should be shifted to the hospital. Now, hospital means it could be any tier hospital. It could be from a primary healthcare center to a big apex tertiary care center, does not matter, but it should be done. Now, so this is the first one to remember. What happens when you get a patient at the hospital? Now, when you get a patient at the hospital, as I have said, we always apply the trauma principles. And when any trauma victim comes to you in the hospital, what are your responsibilities? Now, as everyone talks about the ATLS philosophy, so we always follow the ATLS philosophy exactly in the same way. And our priorities are A, B, C, D, E. And definitely we can add the word F also in this part. Now, what does the word A mean? The A in this area is always airway, and like any other trauma, airway becomes a very, very extreme important part, particularly if there has been a history of a inhalation injury. Remember that a history of an inhalational injury is an example of something called as an airway, and this is what is important in the story. Now, other parts of airway assessment are important, particularly what are the signs of a distressed airway is something that you know, and rather than seeing with a peripheral or a pulse oximetry, it is the change in the voice, change in the stridor, and if you look into the nose or the nasal hair, remember that burning or singeing of the nose or the nasal hair will go much more in favor of an inhalational gases which can produce the effect. So please remember this is a very, very, very important part, because majority of the laryngeal edema, airway obstructions are going to kill the patient if you do not say understand this part. Okay. Now the next part is when you talk about the breathing. When you talk about the breathing, remember that majority of the patients, except for those who appear to be without any distress, very minor injuries, should usually always be started with 100% oxygen. They usually will be started with again inhalational oxygen, and the oxygen is usually given at a high flow rate at about 5 to 10 liters should be the initial flow rate of oxygen. Now, the reason again for talking about oxygen in inhalational injuries should always be understood. Okay. The C in the story talks about the circulation. And whenever we talk about the circulation story, it is always a good to give a bolus of fluid. Now, it is always good to give a bolus of fluid, and thus what you are required to remember in the management is that until and unless you have done a sizable amount of calculation for the burns, a patient is required to receive a bolus of IV fluid for a burn injury. Now, the next of the question that starts is what is the fluid that should be started initially, because we are going to have a little talk about what should be the fluid that the patient should receive. And there has been controversies about Parkland formula, Muir and Barclay formula, and those things. But one or few things that have been always very constant is that the initial bolus of fluid should always be at a high volume. Now, usually enough, it should be multiplying the percentage of the burns or the TBSA, total body surface area of the burn area, into the patient's approximate body weight. So, say for example, a patient is about 50 kgs in body weight and has a 50% burn injury. So, it is about ml per hour should be the initial bolus of fluid that you are required to give. After you have given the bolus, then definitely the final calculation, etc., are done, and you can adjust that with the amount of the Parkland formula fluid that you are required to give. Okay, so this is the first part. So circulation is done with. Now, as I have said, the usual fluid is always a Ringer's lactate, and when you talk about the D is the disability, which again means a Glasgow Coma Score assessment. Now, Glasgow Coma Score assessment, even if there is no head trauma, suggests that if the patient has a Glasgow Coma Score of 15, suggests a good cerebral oxygenation, which is very good. Okay. The E in this is exposure, which is again usually not done at the primary survey because you do not need any hypothermia to occur. So what you are required to do in this E, until and unless there is an extremity trauma or a fracture or a vascular injury, is you are required to cover the patient to prevent any heat loss, which believe me is a very, very important part of the treatment and is a very neglected part of the treatment. The last of the words F stands for fluids, and definitely, as we all understand, circulation is the mainstay of the treatment. So the initial part of the story. Now, if you think about, like we learned about a trauma, what exactly happens to be the cause of the death in burn patients? Like you see, the trimodal distribution was there in the trauma. Now, in burn patients also, we do not usually get a trimodal distribution. So this trimodal distribution peak, rather than having a trimodal, the first of the peaks that we have is about something called as a hypovolemia. So this is all about the hypovolemia. Now, this peak is also compounded by inhalational injuries, and inhalational injuries will also be in this part. Now, this usually is seen up till the first 12 hours of the injuries and can extend even up till the 24 hours of this effect can go on. Now, if the patient does survive, and majority of hospitals across the world, by their good resuscitation philosophy, are able to make the patient survive, and another graph starts creeping in, not usually before 24 hours, and the peak starts usually at the third day, fifth day, and then it goes on to reach the same height, and it will go on till about the third week. So please see that these are the usual graphs that you can draw. If you have thought about the trauma graph, this is the burn graph that you can have. The initial part of the story, now the source of the sepsis is going to be different across the different timelines. In the initial part, that means at about the 48 hours, it could be an exaggerated response to SARS, which can lead on to development of a MODS, and there could have been a bacterial infection which is super added, and along with immunosuppression can lead to an organ failure. Whereas if you wait for more than 96 hours, that means the day 4, it is a burn wound infection. Now, along with a lung infection, ERDS is somewhat in between, which is somewhat could be contributing to the sepsis. If you think about beyond the 7th day, it could have been again due to multiple causes, not only the burn wound. Whereas lastly, it could be some specific causes, example, a lung infection maybe, which could have been the contributory factor. So if you think about that, what are the causes of burns? And if you see or understand this graph, the management of your patient, more or the less, is tapered then thereafter according to this. So if this is the initial management that you did at the hospital, now after you have done with the initial management, you have started the IV fluid. Now let us talk about what are the things after the initial management should be or considered for a referral criteria. That means if you are a general surgeon working in not a apex center but a district tier hospital, then what are the important parts of the management that you are allowed to do, and what are the important points which you are allowed to refer to them? Now, I'm not aware of any existing referral criteria of Indian burn associations, or but there are referral criteria of American burn associations, which are more or less a well-published criteria, and people usually go for these criterions to ask about various examination questions to now. Now, the importance about knowing this is that burn patients also have a strong medical legal connotation. So what is important is when we'll talk about these medical legal connotations at the end, that what are the points to talk about in medical legal connotations, because this is one among those cases that which you are required to be going to the court of the law as a special witness. So you are required to know what are the points to talk about in the court of the law. Now let us again come back. What are the referral criteria, or when can you refer the patient to a apex center or a burn unit? Now, the first one is that burns which involve the face burns which involve the hand, burns which involve the feet, or burns which involve the genitalia. Please remember that involving of major joints, not minor joints, involving of perineum should always be in the referral criteria. Number 2, third degree burns at any age group. Now, third degree burns, we'll talk about what are the degrees of burns, and third degree burns at any age group is a referral criteria. Electrical burns plus lightning burns again are important referral criteria. Chemical burns are referral criteria. Burns with inhalations are a relative referral criteria, provided you have a good ITU or an ICU or an ITU backup with a good respiratory care team. Now, the next part of this is that the other criterions are not that strong in a developing country perspective. Say, for example, burns in children who require special attention. Okay, burns for those who are emotionally labile or have a social problems are those issues. But from the surgical viewpoint, these are the referral criteria which you are required to remember for a referral of the burn patients, which you can do within the first 24 hours. Now let us talk about patients and let us hope that we are in the apex hospital. Now let us see what are the things that we are likely to do. Now whenever we talk about burns, I will divide the management of burns very easily into management in the first week, or management rather than talk about the first week, we should talk about the management in the first 96 hours, or the up to the fifth day should have been a great extension. Okay. The next part would be, some people had extended to the week, which it should not be. The second one are that the specific concerns at about from the fifth day to, I will say, the months or 3 months after the burn injury. Now, some people say that why don't you change it to a third day? Well, things do not get well at third day, so I made it fifth day to the 3 months. And then there are particular forms of rehabilitation which are long-term targets. So if you divide your attention or your long targets of a burn management, the first is something called as an immediate target or immediate priority. The second one is an intermediate priority. And the last one is a long-term priority or a target. Now understand that all of them are important, but all of them have their own time. To start with the first priority, or what are the immediate priorities. Now, as I've said, the more we talk, the more details we go into, the more we will be getting into more complex things. So time is limited, and definitely I don't want to bore you out. Rather than at the end of the class, I will always like to have a discussion about what are the natures of the burn injuries and that. Now, whenever you talk about the immediate priorities in a burn patient, as I have said, the first of the immediate priorities after that ABCDEF story is assessment for inhalational burn. Now, when I talk about an inhalational burn, what is extremely important is that majority of these patients who have a history of an inhalational burn or burn in a closed room, their main concern is always to look for a laryngospasm and a laryngeal edema are the two main points that you are always required to know: laryngospasm and laryngeal edema. Now, what is important is that this group needs an intense monitoring, and the next point is that at about a change in the voice or a decrease in the saturation, you should consider an elective intubation. There are objective criteria like decrease of the SpO2 less than 60 millimeter, increase in carbon dioxide and those factors. But the main point is that as a surgeon working in the emergency, if the patient has a voice change with a decrease in the saturation, please remember, consider at least an elective intubation. Now, when should you consider a tracheostomy in a burn patient? A commonly asked question in your Viva. The answer is that with our modern understanding of trauma, tracheostomy probably does not have a role in the immediate priority. Rather than do a tracheostomy immediately, which can be difficult, if you have a difficult access by intubation, it is better to think about doing a surgical cricothyroidotomy. And as I have mentioned, if you are worried about that the airway is badly injured, so please consider an early elective intubation. After you have maintained the surgical cricothyroidotomy, that means maintained through the cricothyroid space and endotracheal tube, and the patient is on a mechanical ventilation for more than 7 days for doing a pulmonary toileting, it is good to go for a tracheostomy thereafter. So please remember that we have talked about inhalational burns, and there are multiple medications starting from use of heparin, starting from use of other acting drugs like bronchodilator drugs. Some people use hypertonic saline to dislodge the mucin. But the main essence of this is an early understanding, intubation, and pulmonary care will be the better word rather than talk about pulmonary physiotherapy. Hence, elective ventilation parameters are again described in books, but this is the domain of critical care. So the first one to talk about in emergency is inhalation. Rather than jump on to the fluid management, please consider the inhalational burn area as extremely important topic. The second point thereafter, what occurs in a burn patient is IV fluid, because as I have said, majority of patients will die in the first part because of something called as an hypovolemia. Now, why does hypovolemia occur is something that you know, that in burn what happens is that burn injury produces a lot of release of chemical inflammatory mediators. So there is a lot of release of inflammatory mediators and all those cytokines and things come out. Now, what are the effects of that? The effects of that are that if it is always going to produce capillaries which are going to leak fluid. Okay. So if the capillaries are leaking those fluids, that means the area where there is a burn is going to have a blister. So the blister is only an essence that yes, the capillaries are leaking fluid. Whereas on the other hand, if the burn area exceeds more than 20%, some people say that no, it exceeds more than 30%. What occurs is that these chemical mediators come in the systemic circulation, and when they come in the systemic circulation, what occurs is there is systemic leakage of capillaries. And now understand this concept very well, because this is very fundamental idea. Now, where are the capillaries leaking out? Now, the capillaries are leaking out in the lungs, in the interalveolar spaces. So, effectively giving you to a picture that looks like an ARDS. Capillaries could be leaking out in the brain, giving rise to an interstitial or a cerebral edema. Capillaries could be leaking out in the soft tissues in the body, which could be leading rise to not only a loss of the fluid, but also if you are considering the limb, like the hand and the feet, there are muscles, and if there is a capillary fluid leak, what is the more important danger, ladies and gentlemen, if there is a capillary fluid leak? Compartment. Very good. It's a compartment syndrome. And compartment syndrome is not a very happy thing. Remember that it decreases the blood flow. Capillary, if leaking into the pleural cavity or the peritoneal cavity, particularly the peritoneal cavity, can even lead to abdominal compartment syndrome. So now see the problem. The problem is twofold. There is a decrease in intravascular volume and the patient lands up with a hypovolemic shock. But parallelly, the capillaries are leaking fluid not outside the body. So it is unlike that of a femoral artery injury. A femoral artery injury is going to lose blood outside the body. This is an example where the patient is losing not blood, but the fluid in his own body, and thus he is having an hypovolemia from intravascular system, whereas that fluid inside the compartment, so for example, abdominal compartment syndrome, produces an IVC compression that leads to more decrease in preload, less or decrease in the cardiac output. So IV fluids thus in the first 48 hours will be the cornerstone of your management. Now, what is the IV fluid and what should you be giving? Now, we'll not talk about what IV fluids or what is the formula, because more or less that is an undergraduate question. Majority of calculations of IV fluids will go according to either the Parkland formula, okay, or the Muir and the Barclay formula. Now, whatever may be the formula does not matter. It is usually, remember that these calculations are based on the amount of fluids that you are using, which is divided between crystalloids and colloids. Now, whenever you talk about colloids, what is the rationale about what is a crystalloid and what is colloid? The word crystalloid means the clear fluid. So that means the crystalloid in our purpose is a Ringer's lactate. It is clear, hence called crystalloid. The colloid is somewhat thicker, and the colloid in concern is albumin. Please do not consider blood as a colloid or blood as a replacement. Now, so what is problem in this picture is only one, that once there are capillaries which are leaking things into the tissue, so obviously what is going to leak out into the tissue is albumin. And if albumin is going to leak out into the interstitium, it is going to take out the water from the capillary into the interstitium. So rather than help the patient, colloids in the initial part of the description with multiple, if you go to the Cochrane gives you a big description about why should albumin not be used. Okay, so people have argued that, okay, doc, if that means I have understood that albumin in the first 48 hours is not a good choice, so why don't you use hypertonic saline? Well, that is said to be a good choice, but the only problem of an hypertonic saline is that due to the hypovolemia, already there is a hemoconcentration. Now, do not allow the sodium levels to cross more than 160 milligram per cent. The normal sodium levels are 135 to 145. So the main problem with use of hypertonic saline is a rigorous monitoring and a good urine output that you require. So majority of us will not use a colloid in the first 48 hours, but go for crystalloids, whose calculations are something that you know of, and we'll not discuss about what are the calculations that are done. Now, usually the calculations are done if you're using a Parkland formula into 4 into percentage into the body weight in the first 24 hours, which can be divided into 8 and 16 hours. The next 24 hours is 2 into percentage into the body weight. The next 24 hours, that means beyond 48 hours, it is 1 into percentage into the body weight or the maintenance fluid, whichever is larger for the patient. But definitely this balance is all with the urine output, which is usually a more or less a monitoring tool. So this is the second topic that needs to be covered, is something called as an IV fluid. Now, the third priority in the immediate management is pain relief. And pain relief is always with use of narcotics or opioids. And opioids, remember, the choice of opioids is always IV. Now, there is a misconception about giving an IM or a subcut. Please remember, this is not a good idea, given the point that whenever you are using that injection of that opioid IM, due to the peripheral vasoconstriction, that drug is not going to go into circulation. So there has been patients, even we had one such patients once, in which lots of amount of pethidine was given. Now, the patient has a vasoconstriction initially. When the patient did return with a good circulation, he had been given so much amount of pethidine that it went into the circulation and he had an apnea. So please remember, try to use a tapered dose of narcotics intravenously for a pain relief. So this one is the next point. Do not use diclofenac or NSAIDs because already the patients, due to the stress, are going to have those ulcers in the stomach and more acid productions. It leads to unnecessary GI complications and are thus avoided in such patients. Now, the fourth point of target is to give a tetanus prophylaxis, particularly an anti-tetanus globulin if it is a more than 30% burn. All patients should receive the tetanus toxoid, particularly more than 5% burns, etc., should receive tetanus toxoid. The last of the 2 points to start with is that should I start an antibiotic? Now, people are divided into that, but definitely the more or the less the agreement that is there is that more than 30% surface area burns and history of an inhalational burn and comorbidities associated with a burn should make you think about starting an empirical antibiotic. Usually, the empirical antibiotics are directed against a gram positive and a gram negative. And hence, if you see, again, the carbapenems are one among the more favored drugs rather than use only an amoxiclav. Will you use metronidazole or not depends upon perineal burns, etc. So metronidazole as such can be a toxic drug, but if there is a perineal burn, it should be used. This completes the last point, which makes a transition between your first 48 hours is what to do with the burn wound. What to do with the burn wound in this patient. Now, the main concern for a burn wound is that, as I have said, the initial 48 hours for the patient is screaming in pain. Now, what is important to understand the description is only one. The burn wound in concern, remember the first 48 hours, try to go for cover of the burn wound. And the first point is to cover the burn wound, remember, you need 2 points to understand. Number one is that you need something called as the medications, which are again divided according to, as you have read, Saviston, salves, or I call them as ointments, and as soaks or liquids, which are used. Now, the second one is, after that cover, is dressings which maintain the medications. So please remember the first 48 hours, the main target is to cover the burn wounds, number two, and to have an appropriate dressing. Now, usually the questions that are asked, not only in an examination, is what should be the medication and what should be the choice. Now, the choice depends much on the local policy rather than having some science into that. As I have said, if you talk about salves or ointments, the more preferred things to start with are silver sulfadiazine, okay, and or mafenide acetate. Now, each of it has its own degree of advantage and disadvantage. Whereas, when you talk about soaks, remember that when you talk about soaks, the main point of knowing about soaks about using antibacterial solutions. It can start with silver nitrate, which is not used now. We have changed much from this soaks to use much of the salves. And the more favored one starts with silver sulfadiazine, but you can use also mupirocin neomycin ointment. Now, so after you have done this part of the story, so let us have a recap about what are the things that you did in the emergency till now. So after the patient did come to you in the emergency, you went in with that ABCDE approach, started with an IV fluid, took care of the airway, gave the patient inhalational oxygen, and after that, when you took a breath, then come back, and then the first thing that you looked into was inhalational burns. If there is no inhalational problems, good for the patient, then you concentrated on giving the patient IV fluids, and you have already started IV fluids, pain, etc. At this point, I'm usually asked, by this time, have you calculated the surface area of the burn? As I have said, I have kept it little bit away because these are the main priorities in an emergency. Because calculating the surface area and what is the extent of the burn is an important meticulous estimate that needs to be tapered, because remember that the fluid calculation talks about a brief percentage of the burns. Now, whenever you are asked about this question that what is the surface area of the burn, how do you estimate the surface area? Believe me, the simplest one that we use in emergency is the hand of the patient. One hand of the patient is 1% of the TBSA. So, by a brief estimate about how many hands of the patient has burned, your calculation about the initial IV fluid is usually done into that. Now, does it translate onto the Parkland formula, which should not ideally be the case, because by the time you are formulating the Parkland formula or the Muir and Barclay, it should be more or the less a near accurate estimation. Now, near accurate estimations are usually done by the rule of 9, which is definitely not the accurate one. There are charts in children called as Lund and Browder chart. And there are many hospitals that have their charts displayed in the emergency so that you can use these charts to calculate. But believe me, the simplest one is to use one hand's area to calculate what is the percentage of burns. Definitely the more easy ones to know are rule of 9s for the patient. So this starts with calculating the surface area. Now, along with the surface area, there is another story that also must be done, because the treatment is now going to be different. The minute you have calculated the surface area, remember that you are required to know something called as the degree, technically called as the depth of burns. Now, when you talk about the depth of the burns and degrees of burns, why should I be talking about it so much late in the discussion? It is already about 40 minutes late into the discussion. Why am I doing this so late? Because when you have a burn patient in the emergency, you do not go for first degree or third degree at the first attempt. Your first attempt is to resuscitate the patient and make the patient live. Then after you have done the resuscitation that you have done, then you go for calculating that surface area and the depth of the burn, because now we are going to take some firm decisions based on that. A first degree burn is usually only a erythema of the skin, and the skin, remember, is intact in a first degree. Points to remember for a surgeon: first degree burns do not leave any scar, no scar. Number two, do not use first degree in measuring the surface area. So if there is a first degree, second degree, third degree, do not use the first degree in measuring the surface area. These are usually painful burns, but are temporary and usually will stay for 6 to 8 hours before the vasodilatation goes away. A second degree burn is the more common type of burns, which are divided into two types, a superficial and a deep. And rather than talk about in like forensic medicine does, we are surgeons. Our concern of knowing is that second degree superficial burns, and both of them are going to form something called as a blister. Now, please don't keep an idea that blisters in deep burns are larger, blisters in deep burns are opaque, blisters in superficial burns are crystal clear. Those concepts are not usually a very valid concept. What is important is that both of them are painful. Definitely pain is more on a superficial, because A few of the nerve endings have been burned, the few of them have not been burned. Deep burns, again, as I have said, superficial deep, are painful, but still they are little less painful than that one because the nerve endings have burnt away. The next one is that the depth of the burn is dermis and definitely epidermis. So when you go for an excision of this burnt skin, please remember the end point is always a punctate hemorrhage. The end point to a postgraduate to remember is a punctate hemorrhage. This becomes an important point for you to remember. So whenever you are taking away this burnt piece of skin, we'll talk about that very quickly now, by something called as a tangential burnt skin excision. Remember, at the end of the procedure, there should be a punctate hemorrhage bleeding that must be seen. If it is not seen and you have taken out the dermis, ladies and gentlemen, you are probably dealing with a third degree burn, which means you need to take out the full dermis and the epidermis and the underlying bits of the fat with it. So that's a different story. The last one and the most important one is these burns are responsible for producing a scar. And the interventions that you do, the earlier you do, like excision of the burnt skin and covering it with a skin replacement or a skin, is going to determine the future of the patient. So please understand this part when we talk about a second degree burn. When you talk about a third degree burn means the burnt skin includes epidermis, dermis, and subdermal tissue. So it is all about the epidermis, the dermis, and the subdermal tissue, that means the fat. Now the difference between these two are, number one, this forms not a blister but a dead piece of skin which does not have any sensation. So there is no sensory stimuli that could be elicited. Like if you put a pin prick, there is no sensation. Number two, that same pin prick, there is no bleed from this part of the tissue either. So this piece of tissue then is dead and is called as an eschar. What is understandable is that now what happens if you do not remove the eschar, ladies and gentlemen? Can anyone answer to me what happens in a third degree burn if you do not remove the eschar? What happens? Hello?
Sir, if it is in the chest, then there will be respiratory distress, sir.
Okay,
And
good
in
one.
the
So you're now
extremities, then there will
thinking
be
about, right.
compartment.
Okay, very good. So that means good one. I really like this approach. Now see, the simplest of the forms is that, say for example, this is just a 1 centimeter eschar on the forearm. How do you think this eschar is going to heal? There is going to be scar formation in this. How will this eschar heal? So this is a very small burn, but eschar degree burn. What do you think is the way this is going to heal? Any idea? This is going to form an ulcer, which is a non-healing ulcer. And non-healing ulcers are not a very good idea because they are going to lead to a lot of fibrosis. And a fibrosis in an area, as you know, can lead to what complication?
Sir, Marjolin's also.
That is a long story, a contracture. Okay, so contractures can also be a consequence of this story. But what is understandable is that if you do not remove the scar and if you do not cover that area of the body which had the scar, the obvious problem that the patient is going to land up if he or she survives is there is going to be an ulcer, and the ulcer, if it does heal, it will heal by fibrosis to produce a contracture, which is not something that you desired. And now talk about other constrictive effect of the scar, which means, as you have very, very appropriately said, that if the scar is over the limb, definitely it is going to decrease the blood flow of the limb. If it is over the chest, it is going to hamper with the movement of the chest wall. So what is important for us to remember is that in a first degree, do not worry. Second degree, things to worry, and your surgical management is a crucial part. Third degree, oh yes, surgeon has the utmost important role. A fourth degree burn technically means that the burn depth has now extended beyond the skin and the fat and is usually in a limb going up to the muscle and usually lands up with an amputation of the limb or a non-viable limb. So remember, fourth degree burns are particularly seen with electrical injuries. These limbs have a major problem about the neurovascular damage. So this completes your assessment about what is the burn. I will spend around 10 minutes in giving a note about the burn patient. That becomes an important medical legal thing to learn. So after you have done all of these, your first 2 days are complete. You have had a dressing done. You treated the patient with empirical antibiotics. And now at the end of the first 48 hours are over. And now the story starts about after the initial resuscitation is done, then what? Now, after the initial resuscitation is done, there are two things now to understand. Point number one, as I have said, I need to think about sepsis prevention. Now, when I talk about sepsis prevention, let me ask you a very simple question. What could have been the source of the sepsis? Because we are surgeons, our thought processes are like commandos. We think very straight. So what do you think should be the sepsis prevention, or what is the source of the sepsis in this burn patient?
Sir, UTI.
UTI. Well. See, the first and the most important source is the dead skin.
Sir, wound.
Isn't it? The wound or the burnt skin. That means if there is a dead appendix, you are going to remove that dead appendix, isn't it? If there is a bad gangrenous gallbladder or a bad gangrenous bowel, you go for a resection. Now, consider the same story with a burned skin. And now tell me honestly, how many of you have seen this burned skin, which is technically a dead skin, isn't it? This dead skin being removed. Because if you keep that dead skin, that is going to get infected. Or if the skin doesn't get infected, what is it promoting then? It is promoting the growth of bacteria and fungus below the dead skin, which can now produce sepsis. So what becomes extremely important is that this bad piece of skin has to come out to control your sepsis, to remove the bacterial and the fungal load. So this is the first part. Okay, we'll talk about this again very quickly. Any other source of sepsis? Yes, as you have said, lines. Very appropriately said, say for example, a folic acid. Good. Right. Any other source of sepsis? Can anyone think about any other source of sepsis?
So nosocomial.
Central lines.
Again, lines, doctor.
Lung.
Very good. Very good.
Sir,
Lung.
hypoalbuminemia.
Sir, why will albuminemia lead to an sepsis, sir? Hypoalbuminemia is a state of hypermetabolism. That is the other side of the picture. But my question is very simple. Now, we are surgeons. We have to remove that source of sepsis. Lung is a very important source. Okay. Another point is the GI tract. By this time in the whole picture, the patient was being treated aggressively. We forgot to feed the patient. Now, and the intestinal tract, which has been staying silent, particularly if there is a paralytic ileus, will have all the bacteria in that, and the bacterial proliferation is going to produce a translocation. Translocation produces things that go to the mesenteric node, inflammatory mediators. They go to the liver and more inflammatory mediators. That means the GI tract. So that means by this time, after the resuscitation, a few of our priorities are again getting clear. So let us again reorganize our thoughts and let us talk about after the resuscitation, what are our priorities to do? Number one, we should take care of the burn wound. Okay. Priority number two, we should feed the patient. Okay. Priority number three, the patient should be having an adequate pain management. right? Number fourth, if you are talking about sepsis, sepsis should either be prevented or sepsis should either be treated. Now, these are the main things that you have now after the resuscitation. The patient has survived. Now, let us start with the first point about wound care. Now, when you talk about wound care in a burn, let us talk about what are the things very quickly to know. The wound care means you have to remove the dead piece of skin. The dead skin is removed. Now, the dead skin that can be removed either could mean you taking it out in a full thickness. Which degree of burn will let you to remove the full thickness dead skin? Which degree of burn will require you to remove that full thickness dead skin?
Second degree.
Third degree.
Third degree, sir. What is a third degree burn? I told you epidermis,
Dermis and
dermis,
subdermal.
and subdermal layer or little amount of fat. So that means what is the instrument that you are required to do to take that bad piece of skin out? Is usually a scalpel knife or a diathermy. And after you have taken that bad piece of skin out, what is the resultant defect going to look like? It is going to look like an ulcer, like any debridement that you have done. Remember that this ulcer or the debridement that you have done, so this needs again a cover, but that cover is not a very simple one. It is going to be a challenge to you. The other side of the story is a partial removal of the skin, which needs to be done when there is a blister in a second degree burn. So how do you go for something called as a tangential burn, wound, or skin excision? Various people have used various things. Probably one among the most simplest way is to use a skin grafting knife and a blade. I hope you have seen a skin grafting. Many of you may have done a skin grafting. After you have removed the bad piece of the skin, what should be the end point that you have?
Punctate
Now
hemorrhage.
that means very good. So please remember that if this is the bad piece of the skin, what is also I make a picture, I made a picture like this so that you could remember this one. After you have done or removed this layer of the dermis and this, what is important and end point is that there should be punctate hemorrhages. Now, as I have said, second degree burns, remember that second degree burns may heal spontaneously and then form a scar, and this scar formation from a second degree burn is dependent upon what is the depth of the burn. Second degree superficial can maintain the hair follicle, and it is from this hair follicle you can have little amount of epidermis that regenerates. But if it is a deep burn which burns even the hair follicle, that is going to form a bad scar. So all depends upon what is the depth. Now after that, the next tier of the problem starts is that after the excision is done, then what? Then you need either a skin or a skin replacement. Now this is where the world has gone really into an advancement. The skin that you take to cover that, and I really like one word that Lavan Bailey always says, the best dressing that an wound can have is always the skin. So the problem is that where will you get the skin from? Any idea, ladies and gentlemen? Where will you get the skin from to cover the wound? Hello. Okay. So
From the
number one
patient
is
itself.
from the patient itself, autograft. Now the only problem, sir, is if it is a small area and you are doing a burn dressing today, okay, good one, you need a skin. Now the next day you feel that some other area is bad and that skin needs to be excised, So an autograft, the only problem is it is always of a limited availability. So what people do is that they do something called meshing in that. That means you make those crisscross lines and stretch it to make it usually in a 1:4 ratio and do this. Now, so this is usually the favored one. But if you require more skin, you can use something called an allograft, which is, I have not seen anyone do this in my practice, a cadaveric skin. Now, the main problem is that with this autograft, people have taken from the autograft keratinocytes, and the keratinocytes have been cultured, and this is something that I work as a research proposal. We have cultured keratinocytes, which we use in form of sheets and try to form a matrix. People have used multiple skin replacements, and this is not the place to talk about. Starting from, again, animal derivative acellular dermal matrices, starting from, again, a synthetic skin, starting from xenograft from animals. The list is long. Believe me, the list is really long. But again, there are no particular evidences that which one is better. But one thing is clear, that you need a replacement, either the skin or a skin replacement to cover the wound. What is the role of flaps? Flaps are only of role when you get an ulcer to cover that area. It is not, now flaps do not have a big role when you have a second degree superficial or a deep, because that is going to be dealt by the skin replacement. And number two, in an acute burn, still there is no contracture. We still don't have an area for flaps. So this completes the second part. Other parts of concern in this region, as I have said, feeding is by both enteral and parenteral. Pain management, as I've said, is by opioids. But now the route of the opioid will change, and this completes the second part of description. After this goes, the third part of the story starts by something called as a rehabilitation. And rehabilitation, as you have known, can either be a physical rehabilitation, which is mostly about dealing with contractures, either to prevent their contractures or to treat contractures. There could have been a social rehabilitation, there could have been an occupational rehabilitation, and definitely you need a strong psychiatric help in the management. Now, this is all about, ladies and gentlemen, the very brief way to talk about the management of burns. I think we have dealt with more or less all topics, but again, it was a touch and go on all the topics. The last
Lung
point or the thing, yeah. So lung infection will again go by the same philosophy as you treat any lung infection in the post-operative period. So like all the ventilation parameters that you give, so again the same principles apply to that. Okay. So I will now dedicate the next 5 minutes into something which becomes a very important part for you in your real life. That is something called as the medico-legal aspect of burns. Now, why should I be thinking about a medico-legal aspect of burns? Because for one simple reason. Now, dependent upon the quality of the care that is present in the hospital that you work in, burn patients have a varying mortality. Again, as I've said, all depends upon the quality of care and other factors like the age of the patient, the percentage of the burns, the presence of other comorbid illnesses, and lastly, definitely the adequacy of resuscitation. Now, in areas which are crowded or with high patient turnover, less amount of qualified physicians or surgeons, definitely the mortality of the burn increases. And burn deaths are always a medical legal concern because the patient is going to be treated as an unnatural death and an autopsy is going to happen. Now, what are your points to remember when you are the treating surgeon or the physician in a burn patient? Now, I will talk about a few things to note about. Remember that to start with, particularly if you are working in the Indian subcontinent or the India, remember in women who are burnt, and that is again within the first 7 to 10 years of the marriage. Okay, What is the specific medical legal concern that I should be worried about? Hello?
Homicide.
Okay. No,
Dowry
yes, I
debt,
know that
sir.
it's
Dowry debt.
very good. Please remember that, well, this is not in advanced countries, but in Indian subcontinent, you may be laughing at these were against
The birth of
MBBS
female child
curriculum.
also.
Sir, please remember that dowry deaths, etc., and there is always going to be an inquest if this unnatural cause of burns happens within the first 7 to 10 years of marriage. Okay, that means that what is your role then? Why should I be telling you these things? Your role comes in an extremely important way because you are the first responder and the first treatment provider to the burn victim. And the burn victim may have said something to you in the history which you have noted down, and that is going to go to the court as an evidence to be used by the different respective prosecution and the defense. So please remember that whenever you are writing that, it is important to talk about in the history sheet about the date of the incidents, about the approximate time of the incidents, about the mode of the incidents. Okay, and in the mode, please remember that if you are using terms like accidental, homicidal, or suicidal, it is better not to use these terms, but rather than describe the mode, because it is the job of the investigating authorities and the judiciary to talk about whether it was an accident or a homicide or a suicide. Because if you have used these terms that the patient tried to commit a suicide by pouring some inflammatory fluid over her, and it later turns out to be an homicide, remember the gentleman or the lady who wrote the word suicide is not going to have a very happy time in the witness box. So please understand these points very well. Next thing to understand is, if you have talked about the date, the time, the mode, please take a note about who gave the history. If possible, please take a signature of the gentleman or the lady, and please note the relationship of the one who narrated the history in front. The reason about saying these words is that you are going to get these burn patients if you are in general surgery in emergency management. And this document that you write is going to be produced in the court of the law as a special evidence. So kindly note this in that. After you have taken all the detailed things, always note the vitals. And while you are recording the vitals, please comment on the consciousness of the patient. And please write the word alert, conscious, cooperative if the patient is. And always write the word before giving a sedative. If you have not written these words before giving a sedative, please remember again in the court of the law, the defense or the prosecution may take out your notes, read about that you have given some opioids and then you took the history, which will nullify all the history that you took. Always comment upon the hydration status while you are taking the history, because hydration status has to be adequate for the patient to narrate a good history. After these things are done, it is good to draw a picture like this. And please understand that picture should note anterior and picture should note posterior view, and then shade whatever area you like. And at the end, write second degree. This is not the way to write. Write second degree deep thermal burns. And please always write the percentage as approximate. Kindly use or learn these techniques, because if you have said 42% and in the autopsy it comes out to be 48%, then you are really going to have a trouble explaining to the other people how did this thing happen. To you and me, that doesn't create a big difference. But again, if you use the word approximate, it becomes a much easier notion to be talked about. So I think, and after the end of the history, please put your full signature. This is my full signature. And after you have put in your full signature, please write the date and the time, and please complete by saying who you are. If you put a signature like this doesn't go very well in the court of the law. The final part of this thing is that if you are taking something called as a dying declaration, the first thing to ask you about, are you eligible to take a dying declaration? Yes or no? What is your opinion on this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you can. Very good. Okay. So whom will you have as your witness? Sir, who is your witness, sir?
Sisters.
Sister is your witness. Okay, very good. See, the reason about, now you must be wondering, now you must be wondering, why am I telling you these things? The reason about telling you these things, sir, is only one. In a real world, the books have ended by the time you have talked about rehabilitation. But in a real world, when you treat a patient with a burn, the patient will live. That's good news. Patient may die. That is bad. But you have to defend yourself because burns are medical legal. And these things are not taught probably in many places. Now, the question about dying declaration, can you take a dying declaration? So the answer is both a yes and a no. Yes, if there is no other representative from the judiciary or the law enforcing agencies. So yes, if there is no other representative, in that case, you are required to take at least preferably 2 witnesses who are not the relative or no one is interested. If the patient is a lady, so it is better to take always the sister in duty. Please take her name, the designation and the time. Please do not include any relatives while taking as a witness. The statement that the patient narrates is usually written in the mother tongue of the patient, which is the preferred one. If you write in English, then please write that the patient could not write due to whatever reason, or say burns in finger, and please go for a signature of the patient or at least an LTI, preferably more finger imprints, and then say about that this is the left thumb impression. It is good also to have a right thumb impression from the patient as well. So please remember are these things. Dying declaration obviously gets invalid if the patient lives. Now what happens if there is a police personnel in the dying declaration? Will the police personnel act as your special witness? What is your opinion on that? What is your opinion on that? Hello? Will
Yes,
the
sir.
police personnel act as well?
No idea.
That is the reason, sir, I asked you these questions, because in the court of the law, when you will get to see a police officer coming, he or she is going to give you a salute, and you say that, wow, man, I got a salute from a police. The police tells you that, doc, I have taken the statement, just put your signature. What is your opinion on that? How many of you have ever done that thing? There is a burn patient, the police took a statement and you did put in your signature. How many of you have done that?
No, sir, not like that.
No, sir.
Not like that. Good one. Very good one. So what is the thing that you did in your hospital?
Sir,
The police took a statement.
we send a call to the local police officers, sir, for arrangement
Very
of
good.
the arrangement of a local authority, that is the Tahsildar or the local
Excellent.
collector, to take the dying declaration, sir, not the police.
Excellent. Exactly. This is what should have been the. Now see, please remember that those of you who do not remember or know this, dying declaration is not taken by the police on duty. If the police has taken the dying declaration and asks you to put his signature, kindly please refrain from doing it. If you are in middle of an operation, please do not stop the operation. Wait for the operation to get finished. Do not delegate the duty to your junior colleagues, and then go to see the patient, talk to the patient in presence of the sister on duty, and then see the chart, see when the last opioid was given, see the hydration status, and please make a note of all the vitals that I told you, and please note the opioid use. When was the last dose of fentanyl given? If the last dose of fentanyl was given at 6 p.m. and you are taking the history at 10 p.m., no problems. It is not that you cannot take the history or the dying declaration. Let the judiciary or the court of the law decide whether your statement is going to be valid or invalid. But if you are recording the statement, it is always good to comment upon these points while you are writing. So these are the points to be written. And who are your witnesses? As you have very rightly said, if there is no particularly magistrate or any tehsildar or collector, you can take the help of your sister on duty. Number 2, the next point of request is that please remember that whenever it is dying declaration, please remember that if the police personnel comes to you saying that, sir, I need to take a dying declaration, you are the emergency surgeon on duty, what are your obligations to be done? You have not given any letter to them. They have come from the police station. They are asking you, doctor, can we take a dying declaration? What is your opinion? Any ideas? Hello? What is your
No ideas.
opinion? No idea. See, the reason about touching on these topics, sir, is only one. These are the things that you get to do daily. The answer is, you request the police officer, whoever he or she is, to give it in writing that this is a patient XYZ, etc., etc., and the letter should be directed to the superintendent or whoever the principal or whoever is the senior or someone, or even if it will be directed to you. If you are the emergency surgeon or the consultant surgeon in a private hospital, the doctor, I need to take a dying declaration of Mrs. XYZ, because, and please tell that police officer to give the stamp of that police station. Remember that, and that document is to be kept by you in your hospital records, so that when you get a summon from the court, it is requested that you should take a copy of that letter, so that when asked in the court of the law, who told you to take a dying declaration, or who gave an authority for the police to take a dying declaration, so that you are saved by these points. Okay, I think that we have had a lot of non-academic discussions today. I will be taking your questions now on academic issues in bonds. Okay, right. So please ask your questions on bonds, because I know that questions are never-ending things in bonds. Okay, right.
Sir, how do we calculate the percentage in electrical burn, sir?
Ma'am, see, the number one is that the same rule of 9, because see, the burnt skin, the limb, trunk, whatever happens, the same philosophy applies to the rule of 9. The same second degree and third degree is the same. Electrical burns, if you are talking about surface area, this is the rule. But beyond other points or beyond the burnt issue, as you know, there are major issues in electrical burns, starting from the heart, the spine, the myoglobin damaging the kidneys, or other things to be kept in mind.
Sir,
Okay. Any more questions?
Sir, post fifth
Post?
day of a burn, sir, how do we
Mhm.
calculate the fluid resuscitation, sir?
Sir, it is the maintenance fluid. The last class, I think Dr. Sanjay Devakshi told you about the fluid and electrolytes. See, the maintenance fluid collection is something that I understand very well. It is 100 ml per kg for the first 10 kgs of the body weight, like we do in children. 50 ml per kg for the next 10 kgs. And thereafter around 20 ml per kg for the balance weight. Say for example, someone weighs 70 kgs. So for the first 10 kg, it is about 1 liter. For the next 10 kgs, it is about 500 ml, so 1.5 liter. So the balance is 70 minus 20 is equal to 50. 50 kg. So what is 50 into 20? Okay. So it is about 1000. So that means the total fluid requirement for the patient will be 1000 plus 500 plus 1000 is equal to 2.5 liters approximately is the maintenance fluid. But yes, definitely there are insensible losses through the burnt skin. So your urine output should be the good adequate judge for this one.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, in last class, sir, Sanjay sir told that in burn patients, central catheterization should be avoided, sir, because in burn patients, the burn area is there and it is infective, already infective. And if you are giving the central catheterization, then you are entering the organism into central lines. So how far it is practically
See,
possible, sir?
see again, the answer is both an yes and a no. Now, in a circumstance, definitely, see, this is common sense that you try to avoid the non-burnt skin. Obviously, why should we do a central line through a burnt skin? We all know that the burnt skin is a nidus for bacteria. But if the whole trunk and the limb is burnt and you need to do a central line, then either you do through a femoral line. Now, femoral line has its own set of problems, or you do through the burnt skin. So, sir, this is all about taking a balance between good and bad. That's it.
Okay, sir.
Until
Thank
and
you, sir.
unless you are pressed, well, try not to do that. Okay, next one. Next questions, please.
Sir, usually in burn patients, after how many hours, sir, it is contaminated? The burn wound is contaminated, you can say, sir.
See, the minute the skin is burnt, it will take only 1 to 2 hours for the external bacteria to come and definitely colonize the skin. So, sir, it is very difficult. Number two is that the normal skin contains lots of commensal microorganisms. So, the minute the skin is burnt, consider that it is a contaminated skin. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Next ones, please.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
In electrical one, there is one entry wound in the plum and one exit wound in the foot, so, and no skin burn present. So can we give the IV fluid or whole of the skin area?
No, I did not get your question. If you are asking me, sir, how much amount of IV fluid to be given because the patient has less than 1% burn injury, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
That means you are asking me that there is an entry wound.
Yes.
Like this, and there is an exit wound like this. Both of them may be less than 1% of the body area.
Yes.
But your question is then, should we at all give an IV fluid? Sir, the main reason for IV fluid in this patient is not about a fluid loss. The main problem is to maintain an IV line because these patients are more prone to develop a cardiac arrest. Okay, these patients are more prone to develop a spine injury due to the convulsion, or these patients are more prone to develop a renal shutdown. So it is good to consider an IV line in these patients.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Any more queries, please? Okay, so I give you a very quick
management.
Yeah.
Sir, we are giving plenty
Yeah.
of fluids, sir. Only we have to give ringer lactate or we have to substitute with any other fluid?
See, sir, again, this is now fluid management in burns has always been the never-ending controversy across that. The first and the foremost thing is that what fluid you are going to give depends upon what is your hospital's protocol, what is the burn unit hospital's protocol. But majority of us working in general surgical units are going to give Ringer's lactate without glucose to the patient, in the idea that burn produces a metabolic acidosis, and Ringer's lactate, the lactate goes to the liver, produces bicarbonate. That is the philosophy about giving a Ringer's lactate. Now in children, people add dextrose to this. Now Ringer's solution can also be a replacement fluid or as a crystalloid. But yes, definitely there could have been other fluids of concern in these patients. Right. Any more questions, please?
Sir,
Hmm.
if we are not getting central line or a peripheral line, like
Hmm.
what other ways
You
peripheral line
need to do
cut
a
down we
very-
can do, sir.
Always, sir. Textbook
sir.
recommendations are to do an emergency saphenous vein cut down.
Sir, sir. Yes, sir.
Great saphenous vein at the ankle needs to be used in the cut down. This is always a life-saving maneuver.
Sir, and how about I had heard, I don't know how much it is used, scalp vein catheterization, sir, if peripheral veins
Sir,
are not found, shave
I
that
am not
and
very
scalp.
favorable of that in adults, because scalp veins in adults are very difficult to access. In children, it may have been an easier option, but you need a very quick bolus of fluid in a hypovolemic shock, isn't it? So I think that finding the great saphenous vein at a constant anatomical site is more or less. Now, if you're thinking about children, I have heard about or I have read about intraosseous infusion. I've never seen anyone give an intraosseous fluid. So my experience on that area is null.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, if there are no other questions, then thank you. I hope that I had touched around all the topics.